Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this month's Connect with Control M session. My name is Drew Casas, and I'm a TSA for the Control M team at BMC. Today, we will be discussing the Control M server internal processes. Joining us today are our panelists Erwin Sanchez and Ronnie Cabrera. During this presentation, we recommend going to full screen mode by pressing the full screen button. Please note that this presentation is available via the file pods at the bottom of your screen. For any questions you may have during the presentation, please post them in the Q&A pod. We will be addressing your questions at the end of the session. Now let's take a look at our agenda. We'll start with an overview of the Control M server, briefly go over its architecture. And some of the things we will review in the demo are the log files created by the various Control M server components, messages generated by the new day procedure, generating logs with debug enabled, as well as logs regarding job submission. Then we will go over a recap of what we discussed. We'll list some resources, including relevant knowledge articles. Then we will finish with a live Q&A session. The Control M server is the scheduling engine that schedules jobs, manages job processing flows, and submits job handling requests to the agent platforms, performs load balancing, and handles requests from the Control M Enterprise Manager. Here we have the architecture of the Control M server and the various processes that make up its internals. We will briefly cover these processes and their functions on the next slide. The main process is the CE or Communication EM process. It is responsible for communication between the Control M server and the Control M Enterprise Manager gateway. Other functions include the new day procedure and synchronizing the EM and CTM server databases. The CE process is composed of various sub-processes, including SL, or the selector, which is in charge of choosing which jobs will run and when, and the NS, or naming service, which is responsible for sending and receiving requests to and from the agent. The supervisor performs heartbeat monitoring of the Control M server processes. The tracker is responsible for jobs once they are submitted to the agent by the selector. The communication service handles all requests that come from the Enterprise Manager. This includes ordering jobs, job updates, and viewing a job's output. The communication router manages the communication between all processes. The watchdog monitors the central Control M processes and resources and sends an appropriate alert when there is a problem. Lastly, the configuration agent communicates with the CCM and the configuration management server on the Enterprise Manager. The Control M server services are a set of microservices that are independent and can perform individual tasks without making requests from larger components. It also enables your environment to use fewer resources and run more efficiently. The SCA, or Services Configuration Agent, functions as a watchdog process for all these services, which is monitored by the Control M server's configuration agent. Apache Kafka permits the publishing and subscription of data streams between different applications. Zookeeper is a centralized service for distributed systems, which Kafka uses to coordinate between Apache Kafka instances. The service's health monitor produces health reports for all service statuses from live checks sent through Kafka. And the scheduling service is used to calculate the dates that match the scheduling criteria of a job or smart folder. Now we will have a demo of where the Control M server process logs are located. We will dive into the proclog and proclog.save directories and look at some examples of the logs generated by the processes and services we just covered. As you can see here, we are currently in the Control M server users home directory under the CTM_server directory. Before taking a look at the process logs, we will go ahead and verify the status of the processes by running the prf11 command. Here you can see the processes, their process IDs, their status, the requested status, the sleep time, and the diagnostic level. Here we have all the processes, the router process, the CE process, the watchdog, the supervisor, and the tracker. You can see here denoted by the R that all the processes are currently running. From here, we can navigate to the proc log directory where all the internal process logs are stored. These are the logs that are updated in real time by the current Control-M server session. We will list the process logs here. Every Control-M server process log begins with its abbreviation. So we can see here, these are the CE or Communication EM process logs. We'll take a look at the tracker logs here. Here are the watchdog logs, the CS logs, the supervisor logs, and lastly, the router logs. Now let's take a look at the proclog.save directory. We'll return back to the CTM server directory, up one level, and then we will navigate to proclog.save. As you can see, the logs here look very similar to those in the proclog. Proclog.save is where old Control-M server logs are stored, the logs from the previous run. When a Control-M server is shut down or restarted, the contents from the original proclog are moved to proclog.save directory. However, proclog.save only contains logs from the last run. If the server is shut down again, then the proclog.save will be overwritten by the newer logs. Returning to the CTM server directory, we will now go into log/services. And we can list the contents of this directory. As you can see, each of the services has its own corresponding logs. There's a scheduling service, the Zookeeper, Apache Kafka, and the services health monitor. In the next demo, we will review the logs and any messages generated by the new day procedure and where to find those messages. Now we are back in the proclog directory, and we can take a look at some messages regarding the new day procedure. First, we'll take a look at the CE log. The new day time of this machine is 7 o'clock in the morning, and by default, an hour before the pre-new day process will start. So we can see here it starts at 6 o'clock and starts pre-ordering jobs that are scheduled to run on this day. Here we see the pre-ordering starting. And then an hour after, at 7 o'clock, we see that new day time has arrived and has started for this day. Some of the things that happen during new day: resource cleaning, here IOA log and or CTM log cleaning. Conditions and job info and statistics are cleaned. The previous active job file, or AJF. The system daily starts ordering all the jobs that run daily. And here we can see that new day is ordering all of the tables that were prepared during the pre-new day process. Lastly, we have the statistics being cleaned, and then we see the message here that new day procedure has ended. Messages about new day can also be found in the IOA log, also known as the CTM log. Using the CTM log utility, we can access these messages. Just like in the CE log, here we see at 6 o'clock pre-new day ordering has started. At 7 o'clock, we see the new day procedure has started. Control M log cleanup, statistics and job information cleanup, here we see the active jobs file being cleaned and ends. The system daily message that we saw in the CE log corresponds to this message. User daily system has started and ended, and now the new day procedure has ended. This information is helpful if new day is taking longer than expected. You can refer to these messages to see exactly where it is having issues. Additionally, it is important to note that the CTM log is not a file. These logs are located in the database, but you can view the logs or export it to a file using the CTM log utility. By default, the CTM log keeps Control M server activity from the last 48 hours. In this demo, we will analyze job submission information in the process logs. In order to generate these messages, debug must be enabled for the CE component. By using the dbg LVL utility, we can enable debug for the CE process. And by using the prf11 command, we can also verify that the diagnostic level has changed. Now we'll take a look at the CE log while grepping for the order ID of our test job in order to go through the job submission process. We use the order ID to track the job throughout its life cycle in the logs. As we discussed before, the selector is responsible for ordering jobs during their scheduled time window. Reviewing these logs is useful when troubleshooting errors during job submission. Here we see that the selector has started, and it is grabbing the properties of our job from the database. Here we see it's marked for examination, and the job is being sent for its dry check. Dry check starts here. See the pause criterion is passed for the dry check. Now the start time for the job is being verified. Checking to see if the job is in its time window. Is job in the time window is set to true. So the time criterion is passed for dry check. Now that it's passed its dry check, it is now sent to the wet check. Here we see that the wet check has started. Again, we see it verifying everything from the dry check. Is the job in the time window set to true? Here it's checking to see if there are any workloads on the agents. It's passed. Checking to see that the agent is available. That is passed as well in the wet check. And here we see that the submit to the agent begins. Here we see all the statistics and job information being calculated after being submitted. And here we see the message that the submit has ended and the job has left the selector. Here we see a DSEC being written and the job is now currently executing and the status file has been created. And here we see the job has now entered the post-processing state and has finished executing. Now we will review some database issues related to the CE process. We will take a look at messages that denote database disconnections and slow connections to the database. Then we will discuss the database I/O benchmark that can be used with Oracle and MS SQL databases included with the Control-M toolbox. Here, we will review some messages generated in the CE logs about database disconnections. You can see the connection refused messages that we're receiving from PostgreSQL exceptions. Here we have an error from the JDBC database connector, failed to obtain JDBC connection. Above we see messages about the processes not being able to update their heartbeat check, could not open JDBC connection for transaction. And here we see more connection refused messages. This message failed to write CE timestamp. Now let's take a look at some examples of some messages generated by a slow database connection to Control-M. Here you can see these messages stand out. They are denoted by the slow DB message that appears at the beginning. These messages show that the application is having some latency updating the database information. We can also see the time it took to make these transactions. In order to further investigate the messages we just went over, we can use the database I/O benchmark that is provided within the Control-M toolbox. From the Control-M server home directory, we can navigate to the toolbox directory. Here we see the toolbox utility. We can go ahead and run this toolbox utility to get started. We'll enter Y to continue. Then we'll want to choose the first option, database tests, and number 3 for the I/O benchmark. Here we can see that the database is creating and deleting records, and it captures the elapsed time it took. We see that the test took about 9 seconds. It is important to note that results under 5 seconds are considered fast, while any results over 10 seconds could indicate an issue with database performance. Another important note is that this I/O benchmark utility is only available for Oracle databases and Microsoft SQL databases. It does not work with PostgreSQL. Now we can go ahead and take a look at the scripts directory inside the toolbox. Here we can see the SQL script that can also be used to troubleshoot database I/O performance. In the same directory on a Windows Control-M server, we would see the MS SQL IO benchmark.sql script. Here is a summary of what we discussed today. We showed an overview of the Control-M server and briefly went over its architecture. We reviewed the logs generated by the Control-M server processes in the proclog and proclog.save directories, as well as the service logs. We analyzed messages regarding new day in the CE logs and by using the CTM log utility. We reviewed job submission logs by enabling debug for the CE and CS components. Lastly, we analyzed messages regarding database disconnections and slow database connections, and we covered the I/O benchmark utility in the Control-M toolbox that can be used for Oracle and MS SQL databases. Here are some resources that you can use while working with these components. Thank you for attending this presentation. We hope the information provided proved useful in helping you to further understand Control-M server internal processes. We would like to encourage you to provide your feedback on the webinar in the Feedback tab. Please let us know what you thought about the presentation and any topics you may want covered in the future or any comments and suggestions that you may have. Also, we will be sending you a survey in the following days and would appreciate if you took a few minutes of your time to fill your responses and send these in. You may follow us on social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. Past BMC webinars may be viewed on BMC Software Control-M's channel on YouTube. Today's webinar will be posted in a couple of days. We will now proceed with the Q&A session.